civilization moves forward and an idea of progress comes in. Prior to that, there's an idea that history is cyclical, or that eventually everything ultimately will lead back to decline. Scots consider history is something that's sort of forward moving and things get better all the time. So sometimes Scottish Enlightenment is also known as the age of improvement for that reason. Things improve. I would say that that's a very, very important aspect of the Scottish Enlightenment.
Welcome back to Scotland. In this broadcast, we're going to be talking about some of the cool inventions that the Scots made. Be sure to be thinking of questions that you can ask us on our Facebook page. Now let's get to it.
Here we are at Stirling Castle. This was the childhood home of Mary Queen of Scots. My childhood home looked nothing like this. Anyways, in our last two broadcasts, we talked about the history behind the Scottish Enlightenment, as well as key figures in the changes in philosophy. But what you might not know, and that what we haven't talked about, is that many of the inventions that you use today were actually helped improved or invented by the Scots. We also talked about how education was extremely important to the Scots, as well as talking to anyone and everyone. This led to changes within the communication, transportation, and the medical field. One of the biggest improvements was made by a man named James Watt. He was an instrument maker at Glasgow University when he heard about a machine that used steam power to operate a water pump. Sound familiar? He heard this machine was on display in London and had it shipped to him immediately. When it got there, he fired it up and he immediately saw a problem. It was super slow, and it wasted a ton of power. So he did what any great scientist would do and went for a walk. And on that walk, he did it, brain blast. He ran back inside and started working on his new idea. That idea came to be known as the steam engine. Now he made it way more efficient and way quicker as well. He made the engine of the Industrial Revolution. Now don't get confused, James Watt did not create the steam engine from scratch. Two other men did that. What James did was create and improve upon an idea that was already there. That's what the Scots were really good at, was improving and making others' ideas way more efficient. But why was this important? Before the steam engine was created, factories had to be near running water so that they could power a pump to power the factory. But with the steam engine, they could go and place their buildings anywhere they wanted. This was a game changer. Now they didn't have to be near running water. Factories started popping up all over Scotland, and soon, all throughout the world. This was huge. Now the Scots could build their factories wherever they wanted. Not only that, but it created way more jobs. Do you want to know another cool thing that the Scots perfected? I bet each of you today either walked, rode your bike, or were driven to school. And I bet you all did that on roads. The Scots are a big reason for this. They were the ones that created the predecessor to asphalt, which is what our streets are made of today. They would do this by crushing together stones, pebbles, and gravel to make streets. Before these streets were made, it took them 10 days to get from Edinburgh to London. With these new streets, it cut that time down from 10 days to 2. They would ride on these streets in a stagecoach at a roaring 15 miles an hour. A bunny can hop 3 times faster than that. Today, we can hop on a plane and be from Edinburgh to London in an hour and 20 minutes. Let's just say I'm glad I'm not in a stagecoach going slower than a bunny. You guys have heard of the scientific method, right? You start with a question, of which you form a hypothesis. To test that hypothesis, you do experiments. You have 2 groups. One is a control group, where things stay the same. The second group is where you change things. That way, you can compare the 2. Guess who came up with this? Of course, the Scots. A Scot named James Lind is the first one in history to have a recorded controlled experiment. And guess what he did it about? He figured out that by eating citrus fruit, it could cure a disease called scurvy. Scurvy was a disease that killed thousands upon ships traveling to far-off lands. So, make sure to eat your lemons. Or at least drink some lemonade. Let's figure out what else the Scots helped improve. The Scots had a huge influence on the medical field. They thought about the body differently than others. Universities like Oxford and Cambridge discouraged their students from ever touching their patients. But how are you supposed to learn about the body if you can't do that? Instead, Scotland thought of the body as a system, and they used hands-on learning. Edinburgh became the leading place of study in Europe for anatomy. They would use bodies called cadavers in order to study. In fact, they went through cadavers extremely fast because they were studying so hard, and they needed more in order to continue their studies. Two Irish scoundrels named William Burke and William Hare saw this as the perfect opportunity to make some money. They told the university that they would supply the bodies as long as they didn't ask any questions. They started luring people into their boarding house, where they would get people drunk and kill them in the night. One day, a couple staying at the boarding house noticed that people were going missing. They secretly went searching. What they found was a dead body under a bed. They immediately called the police, and Burke and Hare were arrested. Hare lied and got off with no punishment. Burke, on the other hand, was hung. His body was then used as a cadaver at Edinburgh University. How the tables do turn. His skeleton is still there to this day on display. Moral of the story, don't kill people. On a lighter note, imagine this. You're living 200 years ago and you get really sick. So you call up the doctor and he runs over to your house, because they did that back in the day. Oh man, unfortunately, you're gonna need an operation. So the doctor starts pulling out his instruments, putting them on the table. You take a look and you see they've been used before, and they're not that clean. That's disgusting, right? Well, that's what really happened. People would get infected because doctors didn't properly sterilize their instruments. Luckily, there was a Scot named William Simpson came up with the idea and put it into practice to sterilize surgical instruments and bandages. Not only that, but they also made using antiseptic a standard practice in British medicine, and eventually American medicine. The Scots even helped make war more humane. John Pringle, yes, like the chip, was a physician in the British Army. He saw that the sick were not treated well. They were just kind of thrown wherever there was space. And they wouldn't separate the sick from the healthy, which made it so the healthy would usually get infected as well. He knew there needed to be changes in the way the sick were treated. So what he did was first added ventilation systems. That way, the germs didn't sit and fester. New air was able to flow. He then separated the sick from the healthy. That way, the healthy wouldn't get infected. And he added better sanitation systems and bathrooms, which they didn't have before. But he didn't stop there. He knew there was more that could be done, so he came up with an idea. He said, let's move the hospital wing to a neutral zone during the war. That way, the sick and injured would be out of harm's way and wouldn't be attacked. The French, who they were fighting at the time, saw this and didn't attack the hospital. In fact, they adopted the idea themselves. That's how it came to be that hospitals are neutral zones during the war.
All of these ideas are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what the Scots did, but I hope this gives you an idea of the influence that they had. The Scots dared to do, and so should you. Thank you so much for watching today's broadcast. Make sure to tune in for our next one. Stick around after the credits to see where Willie was in the last broadcast. Make sure to submit your questions on Facebook, and we'll see you next time.
Did you spot Willie the Wolverine? Here's where he was in our last broadcast.